For an artist, the body is often the last untouched frontier, a blank canvas in a world of endless creation. But what happens when the canvas begins to paint itself? For Leo Vance, a young artist on the brink of despair, this nightmare becomes a terrifying reality. After a night of drowning his sorrows, he awakens to a mysterious tattoo, an intricate, alien design he has no memory of acquiring. As new, interconnected marks appear each night, forming a cryptic map across his skin, Leo realizes he is no longer in control. He has become the unwilling host to a living, symbiotic ink, an organism that offers unparalleled inspiration at a horrifying price. His body, his art, and ultimately, his life force. Let's begin the story. Get comfortable and listen closely. The rejection letter felt heavier than paper ought to. It lay on the rough-hewn surface of his work table, a stark white rectangle amidst a chaotic explosion of color, smeared palettes, discarded tubes of oil paint, and charcoal-dusted rags. Leo Vance stared at it, the clinical, polite words of the residency board burning in his mind. While we were impressed with the technical skill demonstrated, a lack of a cohesive artistic voice, highly competitive applicant pool. It was a death sentence delivered with a smile. The Northwood Artist Residency wasn't just a career maker, it was the career maker. 6 months of paid solitude, a cavernous studio in the Vermont wilderness, and a guaranteed gallery show in Manhattan upon completion. It was the escape hatch from his current reality. A drafty, overpriced loft in a converted Brooklyn warehouse, where the smell of turpentine was the only thing that could overpower the sense of his mounting debt. His art was his identity, the only thing that mattered, and the world had just told him it wasn't good enough. He pushed back from the table, the legs of his stool scraping against the concrete floor. His own canvases, stacked against the exposed brick walls, seemed to mock him. They were good. He knew they were good. Full of raw, kinetic energy, portraits that captured the jagged edges of a soul, cityscapes that hummed with a lonely electric vibrancy. But they were just his. They lacked that spark, that unnameable quality that separated a talented artist from a visionary. He was a blank canvas himself. No tattoos, no piercings, just the occasional paint smudge on his hands. His body was as unadorned as his career was unrecognized. The weight of the silence pressed in. He needed noise, people, the anonymous comfort of a crowd. He needed a drink. The bar was called the Iron Shard, a name as pretentious and gritty as its clientele. It was a dive, but an art scene dive, tucked away on a cobblestone side street. Inside, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and the murmur of 100 conversations about gallery openings, conceptual theory, and the unbearable burden of genius. Leo slid onto a wobbly stool at the sticky bar, the dim red lighting hiding the frayed edges of his jacket. He ordered a whiskey, neat, and let the burn of it scour the self-pity from his throat. He had another, and another. The room began to blur. Faces swam in and out of focus. A woman with silver rings on every finger. A man with a beard braided with copper wire. A quiet figure in the corner who seemed to be sketching the chaos into a small notebook. Leo felt a strange sense of detachment, observing the ecosystem of striving artists. He might have spoken to someone. He vaguely remembered a heated debate about the death of postmodernism and a shared, knowing laugh over the absurdity of the art market. Someone might have clapped him on the shoulder or bought him a drink. It was a dark, churning sea of moments, and he was sinking willingly. The next morning was a violent assault of sunlight through his loft's massive, grimy window. Leo's head pounded with a rhythm that felt like a sledgehammer striking an anvil. A thick, sour taste coated his tongue. He stumbled out of bed, his clothes from the night before still on, and peeled them off, craving the cleansing spray of a hot shower. He stood under the steaming water for a long time, letting it wash away the grime and the regret. It was then, as he reached for the soap, that he saw it. On the pale inside of his left wrist, it was a tattoo. Small, no bigger than a quarter, but its complexity was breathtaking. It was an impossible fusion of sharp geometric lines and delicate organic swirls, like a fragment of a compass rose designed by an alien architect. The black ink was so pure, so deep, it seemed to absorb the light. It wasn't a sloppy, drunken mistake. It was a masterpiece of precision, rendered in a style he had never seen before. And it was on his body. A cold wave, entirely separate from the shower water, washed over him. Panic seized his chest. He scrambled out of the shower, water pooling at his feet, and stared at his wrist in the fogged-up mirror. It was real. He didn't remember it. Not a flash of a needle, not the buzz of a tattoo gun, not the sterile smell of a parlor. He snatched his jeans from the floor and ripped his wallet out. All his cash was there, save for what he'd spent at the bar. No massive, inexplicable charge on his credit card. He grabbed his phone, his wet fingers slipping on the screen, and scrolled frantically through his calls and messages. Nothing. No record of a shop, no text to a friend about a bad decision. He pressed his fingers against the mark. There was no soreness, no redness, no swelling. There was no flaky scabbing or oozing plasma that came with fresh ink. It felt like it had been there for years, a settled, integrated part of his skin. But he knew, with an absolute certainty that defied all logic, that it had not been there yesterday. He had spent his life staring at his wrists, his blank canvases that held his brushes and charcoal. He would have known. He tried to rationalize. A stick-and-poke tattoo at the bar? No, it was too perfect, too professional. Maybe he'd won a bet, or lost one. Could someone have tattooed him while he was passed out? The thought was violating, terrifying, but even that didn't make sense. The precision was surgical. It was impossible. Leo leaned against the sink, his head in his hands, the hangover-induced pounding now matched by the frantic thumping of his heart. He looked at the mark again. It was beautiful. Terribly, frighteningly beautiful. He closed his eyes and chalked it up to the single craziest, most inexplicable drunken mistake of his life. It was the only explanation that allowed him to keep a grip, however tenuous, on his sanity. For 2 days, Leo tried to ignore it. He wore long-sleeve shirts, a conscious effort to hide the cryptic mark from himself. He tried to paint, but the memory of the rejection and the unnerving presence of the tattoo conspired against him, leaving him staring at blank canvases, his mind a static-filled void. He'd catch himself rubbing his wrist, the skin smooth and unchanged, the impossible design a silent, permanent fixture. He was starting to convince himself he had simply forgotten that in his drunken stupor he'd stumbled into the chair of the world's most discreet and talented tattoo artist. It was a fragile lie, but it was better than the alternative. The lie shattered on the 3rd night. He was in a deep, dreamless sleep when the sensation began. It wasn't pain. It was an itch, but an itch unlike any he had ever felt. It was deep, electric, and insistent, originating from inside his arm. It felt like ants marching in a perfect line beneath his skin, their tiny feet tracing a path up his forearm. He woke with a gasp, kicking his sheets away, his body slick with the cold sweat. He clawed at his arm, but the sensation was too deep to be satisfied. In the pale moonlight filtering through the window, he looked down. and his breath caught in his throat. A new tattoo had appeared. It was a thin, flowing line, the same deep, absolute black as the mark on his wrist. It started at the edge of the first design, an extension of one of its delicate, swirling lines, and spiraled up his forearm in a graceful, perfect curve. It wasn't a separate piece. It was connected, a continuation, like a river flowing from its source. There was no blood, no needle marks, no sign of trauma. It was simply there. Art had bloomed on his skin while he slept. The panic that had rippled through him in the shower now came back as a tidal wave. This wasn't a drunken mistake. This was something else. Something was happening to him. He scrambled for the lamp, flooding the room with a harsh yellow light. The line was flawless, its edges razor sharp. He stared, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. The feeling of violation was overwhelming. His body was his own, the one thing he had absolute agency over. And that agency was being stolen from him night by night. The next morning, his face pale and his hands shaking, he called Anya. Dr. Anya Sharma was a dermatologist, but more importantly, she was Leo's friend from college. She was the rational, scientific mind to his chaotic, artistic one. When he'd called her, his voice tight with the fear he couldn't quite articulate, she told him to come to her clinic before her first patient. "So, you got blackout drunk and ended up with the tattoo you don't remember?" she said, her voice a mix of amusement and clinical assessment as she led him into an examination room. "Leo, this is practically a rite of passage in this city. Let me see." He held out his arm. "It's not just that, Anya. Look." She took his arm, her professional demeanor firmly in place. She examined the mark on his wrist. "Wow, the line work is incredible. I can see why you'd get this, even if you were wasted." It's... Her voice trailed off as her eyes followed the thin line spiraling up his forearm. "It's connected." "It wasn't there on Friday," Leo said, his voice barely a whisper. "The first one was. This new part? It appeared last night, while I was sleeping." Anya's smile faded. She looked from his arm to his face, saw the genuine terror in his eyes, and her posture shifted. She became all doctor. "What do you mean it appeared?" "I woke up. It was itching like crazy deep inside my arm, and it was just there." She frowned, pulling a large, magnifying lamp on a jointed arm over. The bright, circular light illuminated his skin, revealing every pore, every hair. She peered through the lens, her brow furrowed in concentration. For a long time, she was silent, moving the lamp slowly along the length of the new line. "This is unusual," she murmured, more to herself than to him. She gently palpated the skin around the tattoo. No inflammation, no scarring. "Leo, I can't find a single puncture point. There are no signs of needle trauma whatsoever." "I told you." She looked up at him, her scientific curiosity now visibly warring with her concern. "Ink is a foreign pigment suspended in the dermis. The body's immune system walls it off. There's always microscopic evidence of that process. But this..." She leaned back in, staring intently. "This doesn't look like it's in your skin, Leo. It looks like it is your skin. The pigment? It's like your own melanocytes decided to rearrange themselves into a perfect complex pattern. It's a seamless biological change. And that's not possible." The word impossible from Anya's lips was more terrifying than any horror movie. She was the one who explained the world, who broke it down into cells and proteins and predictable chemical reactions. "I need to take a biopsy," she said, her voice firm. "Just a small punch sample. We'll send it to the lab. There has to be a rational explanation. A rare dermatological condition, a chemical reaction to something." She wasn't just trying to reassure him. She was trying to reassure herself. The biopsy was a small, sharp sting, a moment of real, understandable pain that was almost a relief. Anya bandaged the tiny wound, her movements precise and efficient. "Try not to worry," she said, though her eyes told a different story. "We'll figure this out." But Leo knew they wouldn't. The next night, he tried to stay awake, armed with coffee and a bright light, watching his own arm as if it were a bomb. But exhaustion eventually won. He woke just before dawn, not to an itch, but to the dull, phantom sensation of it having just passed. He looked down at his arm, his heart sinking. A new line had grown from the end of the last one, branching into two delicate fork-like paths that snaked further toward his elbow. A pattern was emerging. This wasn't random. Each new addition was deliberate, connected, an act of intelligent design. And with the dawning, sickening horror, Leo realized he was watching a map being drawn. A massive, cryptic diagram slowly, unstoppably growing across the canvas of his body, and he was utterly powerless to stop it. The horror did not subside, but something new and insidious began to weave its way through it. In the days that followed, as the tattoos continued their nightly creep up his arm, Leo found himself seized by an unprecedented creative fervor. The fog of his artistic block didn't just lift, it was violently blasted away. He would wake, see the new alien mark on his skin, feel a surge of evulsion, and then be immediately overwhelmed by an electrifying impulse to create. He worked with a ferocity he hadn't felt in years. His hands, which had felt so clumsy and hesitant, now moved with a preternatural confidence. The colors he mixed were more vibrant, his brushstrokes more decisive. He attacked his canvases, painting for hours on end, forgetting to eat or sleep. The work that emerged was unlike anything he had ever produced. It was brilliant. It was focused, complex, and possessed the very cohesive artistic voice the residency had found him lacking. But it was terrifying. He would step back from a near-complete painting, his body aching and his mind buzzing, and see the patterns from his own skin echoed on the canvas. The sharp, geometric angles, the flowing, organic swirls, they were there, embedded in the fractured light of a cityscape, in the haunted eyes of a portrait. The ink under his skin was not just a passive map. It felt like it was whispering ideas directly into his bloodstream, guiding his hands, feeding his imagination. He was painting better than he ever had in his life, and it felt like a violation. It was an intoxicating, terrifying symbiosis, a devil's bargain he hadn't even agreed to. He was in the middle of a frantic, trance-like painting session when his phone buzzed, rattling against the paint-splattered work table. It was Anya. He wiped a streak of ultramarine blue from his cheek and answered, his voice hoarse. "Hey. Leo, can you talk?" Anya's voice was strained, stripped of its usual clinical calm. It was thin, trembling on the edge of breaking. "Yeah, I'm just painting. What's up? You get the results?" There was a pause on the other end, filled with the sound of a shaky breath. "Leo, the results are impossible." He stopped, the brush hovering over the canvas. "Impossible how?" "It's not a skin condition. It's not a chemical burn. It's not ink," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. The lab ran a full analysis. They ran it 3 times because they thought their equipment was malfunctioning. The pigment, Leo, it's organic. It's a complex, non-terrestrial microorganism. It's not from Earth, Leo. It's bonded with your epidermal cells at a molecular level. It's drawing nutrients directly from your body, from your bloodstream. It's not ink on you. It's a living thing on you. And the sample I took, it's still growing in the petri dish. Leo sank onto his stool, his legs suddenly unable to support him. He looked at his arm, at the beautiful, sinister patterns now snaking past his elbow. It was an organism, a parasite. An alien life form was using him as his canvas and his food source. What do I do? How do I get it off? We don't know, Anya confessed, her voice cracking. We don't know what it is. How can we fight something we don't understand? Has it spread? Every night, Leo said numbly, a new piece. Anya, it's an artist. After the call ended, Leo sat in stunned silence for a long time. The elation of his creative surge curdled into pure terror. The inspiration wasn't his. It belonged to the thing that was colonizing his skin. He had to know where it came from. Frantically, he began to retrace his steps. The night of the rejection, the iron shard. He'd been so out of it, but he had to try to remember. He started digging online, his search history growing more frantic with every query. The Iron Shard, Brooklyn, Strange Art Scene, NYC, Cult Artists Collective. His fingers flew across the keyboard. He learned that the bar was an unofficial headquarters, a known haunt for a very specific, almost cult-like group of underground artists. They were notoriously secretive, known for their pop-up galleries in abandoned spaces and for producing work of stunning, almost inhuman complexity. Rumors swirled around them online, whispers of shared trances, channeled inspiration, and a fierce, almost religious devotion to their anonymous craft. He was falling down a rabbit hole, and at the bottom of it, he knew was the source of the living ink that was now irrevocably a part of him. Leo's frantic research felt like trying to grasp smoke. The artist collective was a ghost online, leaving behind only whispers and echoes. They had no official name, no website, no social media presence. They were a phantom, defined only by the awe and fear they inspired in the digital margins of the art world. Then, deep within a forgotten art forum on a page from 6 years ago, he found it. A link to a hidden online gallery, protected by a simple but obscure password he found mentioned in another post. He typed it in, Canvas Anima. The page loaded, and Leo felt a jolt of nauseating recognition. The screen filled with artwork, dozens of pieces, paintings, digital illustrations, intricate sculptures. They were all breathtakingly complex, beautiful, and terrifying. And they all shared the same unmistakable artistic DNA as the marks growing on his skin. The impossible geometry, the organic flowing lines, the sense of a vast alien intelligence behind the design. It was their style, or, he grimly suspected, the symbiote's style. The artists were all anonymous, credited only with single cryptic letters or numbers. The lore, pieced together from comments and forum posts, was that they didn't create their work in a traditional sense. They channeled it. They were vessels for a shared inspiration, a muse that granted them genius-level ability. Looking at the art, Leo felt the familiar, intoxicating pull he now experienced in his own studio. It was a siren song, promising brilliance. He kept digging, cross-referencing usernames and anonymous IDs, until he found another breadcrumb. A single cryptic post on a blog dedicated to exposing artistic frauds, written by someone claiming to be a former member of the collective. The post was paranoid and rambling, but it contained a chillingly specific warning. They call it the gift, the post began. They tell you it's the source of true inspiration, the key to unlocking your potential. They don't tell you what it really is. It's passed on, not taught. a symbiotic exchange. Sometimes it's in a shared drink, a handshake with a specially prepared balm on the palm, a touch from a specific object, an artifact they all worship. They choose you based on your creative impulse. They say a strong hunger to create makes for fertile soil. But the gift always comes with a price. It gives you the world, and in exchange, it takes your body. The canvas is never truly your own. The artist becomes the art, and then there's nothing left. Get out if you can. Don't accept any gifts. Leo's blood ran cold. A shared drink, a handshake. He thought back to the blurry chaos of the iron shard, the press of the crowd, the clinking glasses. Someone had chosen him. His desperation, his raw, unrecognized talent, it must have been radiating off him like heat. He hadn't stumbled into this. He had been selected, infected. A sick feeling of violation churned in his stomach. Someone at that bar saw him as nothing more than fertile soil, a blank canvas to be primed for their organism. He pushed away from the computer and strolled to the large mirror leaning against his wall, pulling off his shirt. The map was spreading. The lines now curled over his shoulder, branching across his collarbone and onto his chest. He had been so focused on the feeling, on the art, that he hadn't truly looked at the bigger picture. He stared at the intricate web of black lines, his artist's eye taking over. It wasn't just a random, beautiful pattern. It was a blueprint. He recognized the shapes, not as geographical landmarks, but as architectural structures. The sharp angles of trusses, the gentle curve of a vaulted ceiling, the dense cluster of lines that looked like a turbine. It was a building. His mind raced, connecting the dots. The rumors about the collective's secret shows, the talk about abandoned places. He ran back to his laptop, his heart hammering against his ribs, and began searching for industrial ruins in the outer boroughs of New York City. And there it was. An image of the old Ravenswood power station, and derelict Art Deco giant on the edge of Queens, abandoned for 50 years. The sweeping curves of its facade, the rigid geometry of its interior walkways, they were all there, rendered in perfect, terrible detail on his own skin. The map wasn't leading to a place on a globe. It was leading him home. The symbiosis had curdled into pure parasitism. The creative surge, once intoxicating, now came with a debilitating physical toll. Leo would finish a painting in a blaze of feverish energy, only to collapse afterward, his body racked with the profound, bone-deep exhaustion. After a night where a particularly large and complex section of the tattoo appeared, a dense, sprawling network across his right pectoral, he woke up so weak he could barely stand. His skin was pale and clammy, his reflection in the mirror a gaunt, hollow-eyed stranger. The organism was accelerating its growth, and it was drawing more and more energy from him to fuel its design. His own art, the work he was producing, felt increasingly alien. He would look at a finished canvas, technically brilliant and emotionally resonant, and feel a chilling sense of detachment. His hands had made it, but the intelligence guiding them was not his own. The joy of creation was gone, replaced by the grim, compulsive labor of a vessel being used. He was a tool, and the thing living on his skin was the artist. The need to find the source became an obsession, his only hope for survival. He focused his research on the collective, specifically on the power station. He scoured old news articles, urban explorer blogs, and photo archives, searching for any connection. That's when he found a name, mentioned in a small Arts Journal profile from 2 years ago, Julian Croft. The article lauded Croft as a brilliant young artist, a wonderkind who had appeared on the scene out of nowhere, producing a stunning body of work before vanishing just as suddenly. His last known public appearance was at a rumored secret gallery event at the Ravenswood power station. Leo's fingers trembled as he typed the name into a search engine. He found a picture of the artist. It was a candid shot taken at an art show. Julian Croft was young, with intense eyes and a confident smile. And across his visible skin, his neck, his forearms, were the faint, faded remnants of tattoos. The lines were gray and blurred, but the pattern was unmistakable. It was the same map, the same alien geometry that was now emblazoned across Leo's own chest. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The organism was migratory. It didn't stay with one host forever, it used them. It grew its design, its map, using their creative energy and life force as fuel. And when the design was complete, it moved on, leaving the old host, what? Drained, used up, maybe even dead. Julian Croft hadn't vanished. He had been discarded. He was the previous canvas. A frantic, desperate energy seized Leo. He tore his shirt off and stood before the mirror, taking in the full extent of the organism's progress. The map was horrifyingly close to completion. It spiraled up his left arm, across his chest, and was now sending thin, exploratory tendrils up his neck and down his torso, converging toward a single blank spot directly over his heart. He could feel it, an impending sense of finality. It was building toward something, a final piece to be laid in place. He looked at his own pale face in the mirror, the dark circles under his eyes, the subtle but undeniable gauntness in his cheeks. He was looking at a ghost in the making. He didn't know how much time he had left. Days, maybe only hours, before the final piece of the map clicked into place and his purpose as a host was fulfilled. The race wasn't against a clock anymore. It was a race against the ink. Desperation was a powerful fuel. Armed with the knowledge that he was a temporary vessel, a canvas slated for disposal, Leo drove to the edge of Queens. The Ravenswood power station rose against the gray afternoon sky like the carcass of a forgotten leviathan. Its Art Deco facade was crumbling, its vast windows shattered, and the grand eagle statues flanking its entrance were stained with decades of grime and neglect. It was a tomb of industry, silent and imposing. He followed the map on his own skin, a surreal and terrifying guide. A spiral tattoo on his forearm marked the curve of a rusted external staircase. A geometric pattern on his shoulder blade mirrored the lattice work of a collapsed gantry. The building wasn't just the destination, it was the key. He slipped through a gap in the perimeter fence, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Inside, the station was a cathedral of decay. Sunlight streamed through the broken skylights, illuminating swirling motes of dust. The air was thick with the smell of damped concrete, rust, and something else. A faint, almost imperceptible scent of ozone and something vaguely organic, like blooming fungus after a rain. The place was not empty. It was filled with art. Strange, beautiful, and decaying sculptures made from scrap metal and discarded machinery stood like silent sentinels in the cavernous halls. Murals covered the walls, depicting alien landscapes and cosmic events, all rendered in the symbiote's signature style. This was the collective's temple. Following the intricate lines that now reached his sternum, Leo ventured deeper into the heart of the station. He came to the old turbine room, a space so vast it defied comprehension. Three colossal silent turbines sat in the center, monuments to a dead era. And in the very middle of the room, where the central control station once stood, he found it. The source. It wasn't a creature in any traditional sense. It was a large, meteorite-like object, roughly the size of a car engine, half buried in the cracked concrete floor. It was a deep, pulsating black, shot through with veins of what looked like solidified light. The surface was covered in the same living ink-like substance that was on his skin, slowly swirling and shifting in complex, hypnotic patterns. A low subsonic hum emanated from it, a vibration he felt more in his bones than heard with his ears. It was the mother organism, the heart of the symbiote. The tattoos he now understood were its spores, its seeds sent out into the world on hosts to gather creative energy, to form a map, and to finally lead the host back home to feed the parent. His gaze was drawn to a massive mural on the far wall, a piece that was clearly the collective's sacred text. It depicted the full life cycle in horrifying detail. A spore, a small intricate tattoo, finds a host with a strong creative impulse. The spore grows, feeding on the host's biological and creative energy, forming a map back to the source. When the host, guided by the map, returns to the turbine room, the final piece of the tattoo, a specific, complex symbol directly over the heart, is completed. This final mark acts as a key, a conduit. The mural showed a figure standing before the mother spore, a brilliant light connecting the symbol on their chest to the pulsating object. The host's life force and the sum of all the creative energy they generated was violently transferred to the mother spore. The host collapses, and a new spore detaches from the parent, ready to seek a new canvas. Then Leo saw it. Tucked away in the shadow of one of the turbines was a figure. He approached slowly, a cold dread creeping up his spine. It was the desiccated husk of a man, pale and emaciated, slumped against the cold steel. His skin was covered in the faded gray remnants of familiar tattoos. It was Julian Croft, a testament to the terrible truth of the mural. He was the final, irrefutable proof of the price of inspiration. As Leo stared at the husk of his predecessor, a searing, sharp pain erupted in his chest. He gasped and staggered back, clutching the spot directly over his heart. It was beginning, the final piece. He could feel the organism working beneath his skin with the horrifying speed and intensity, weaving the last intricate symbol of the map. It felt like being branded from the inside out. The draining sensation, which had been a slow leak for weeks, was now a torrential flood. He felt his energy, his vitality, his very life force being pulled from him, drawn towards the pulsating mother spore in the center of the room. The creative euphoria he had once felt was gone, replaced by a cold, hollowing void. The hum of the source intensified, the light within it pulsing, faster, brighter. It was a hungry, beckoning call, pulling him closer. His legs felt heavy, his will dissolving. The parasite was calling him home to be consumed. He knew he couldn't fight it physically. It was a part of him now, woven into his very cells. He remembered Anya's voice on the phone, her frantic research turning up nothing. There was no chemical, no weapon, no enzyme inhibitor she could give him that would kill the organism without killing him too. He couldn't destroy the ink. But maybe, he realized with a sudden desperate clarity, he could destroy the canvas. His art, his passion, his creative impulse, that's what it fed on. That's what made him a fertile host. He had been chosen for his hunger to create. To survive, he had to starve the parasite. He had to reject the one thing that had defined his entire life. He had to kill the artist within. It was a choice between two deaths, the death of his body or the death of his soul. He chose to live. He stumbled forward, not towards the spore, but to stand directly before it, his body trembling with weakness and resolve. He closed his eyes. He couldn't fight it, so he would surrender, but on his own terms. He wouldn't give it the inspired, passionate artist it craved. He would give it nothing. He took a deep breath and began an act of psychological self-destruction. He mentally and verbally renounced his art. "I am not an artist," he whispered, his voice echoing in the vast, silent room. He focused not on his triumphs, but on his failures. The crushing weight of the rejection letter, the years of obscurity, the canvases he'd painted over in disgust. "My work is meaningless. It is derivative, empty. a shadow of true talent. He visualized a different life, a life of boring gray conformity. An office cubicle, a spreadsheet, the droning 9-to-5 hum of a life without passion. He forced himself to embrace the mundane, to desire mediocrity. He unraveled every thread of inspiration, every spark of creativity that had ever ignited within him. He was actively, consciously uncreating himself, making his mind, his very essence, a barren and uninspiring wasteland. The organism reacted. The searing pain in his chest faltered. The frantic growth of the final tattoo, now half-formed, stuttered and stopped. The draining sensation ceased. The siphon suddenly cut off. He opened his eyes. The mother spore, which had been pulsing with a hungry, brilliant light, seemed to recoil. Its light dimmed, the deep hum fading to a low, frustrated thrum. It had tasted his mind and found it barren. He had made himself an unsuitable host. His act of creative suicide had broken the symbiotic link. It had rejected him. Leo stumbled out of the Ravenswood power station as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple he no longer had any desire to capture. He was weak, hollowed out, but he was alive. He looked down at his skin. The tattoos were still there, a permanent, incomplete roadmap of his ordeal. The lines no longer itched or grew. The half-formed symbol over his heart was a jagged, ugly scar. They were no longer living art. They were just marks, a reminder of the price of his survival. Back in his loft, the vibrant canvases leaning against the walls felt like relics from another man's life. He picked up a paintbrush, the familiar weight of it in his hand feeling foreign and strange. He stood before a blank canvas and tried to paint. He waited for the spark, the idea, the impulse. Nothing came. The channel was closed. The creative fire that had defined him, that had been both his curse and his entire identity, was gone. It had been sacrificed in that dusty, echoing turbine room to save his life. He was free from the parasite, but in the process, he had lost the most vital part of himself. The silence in his studio was no longer one of anticipation, but one of profound, unending emptiness. A week later, he methodically packed away his art supplies. The canvases were sold for a pittance to a dealer who saw only technical skill, not the alien fire that had forged them. The paints, the brushes, the easels, they were given away or thrown out. He found a mundane job doing data entry for a shipping company, the rhythmic click of his keyboard a dull substitute for the sweep of a brush. He moved out of the loft into a small beige apartment in a quiet, featureless suburb. Anya tried to help, her relief at his survival warring with a deep grief for the vibrant, passionate artist he used to be. She saw the light in his eyes had gone out, replaced by a quiet, settled resignation. He was a survivor, but he was also a ghost. Years passed. Leo built a new life, a quiet life. He was content, if not happy. The passions that drove him were simple: a well-tended garden, a good book, the company of a few friends who knew nothing of the artist he once was. One evening, he was washing dishes, catching his reflection in the dark kitchen window. He was older, softer. He looked at his arms, at the strange, beautiful, and forever incomplete map of tattoos that crisscrossed his skin. He felt a phantom itch, a ghostly echo from the half-formed mark over his heart. He absently scratched it, a faint, wistful memory of an inspiration he could no longer feel. His phone chimed on the counter, a text from a friend. "You've got to see this. This guy is unreal." It was a link to a review in a major art publication. The headline read, "A Genius Emerges, the Stunning Debut of the Mysterious X." Leo's thumb hovered over the link for a long moment before he pressed it. The screen filled with images of artwork. It was breathtaking. It was complex, powerful, and rendered in a hauntingly familiar, intricate style. A new genius had been found. Leo closed his eyes, a profound and weary certainty settling over him. He could almost feel the low hum, smell the dust and ozone of that long-abandoned station. The ink had found a new canvas, and the cycle would begin again. Enjoyed the story? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.